Welcome to the Unbound virtual panel with the pros. Thank you all for joining us today, and a very special thank you to everyone on the panel who've taken their time to join us to share their experiences. Many of them have been very hard earned, so we all appreciate you sharing these with us. I'm Patria Vandermark. I'm the co-owner and curator of Ride Headquarters. Ride Headquarters is a mobile bike shop selling bikes in the Boston area and many places across New England. We've been involved with gravel cycling since before gravel was even a term. I've worked with and I'm working with numerous cyclists on new bikes for Unbound, lots of different events and rides of many different natures. This year, albeit Unbound, with the Ride Headquarters big red van taking on the 200-mile race for the first time. So I have a lot to learn as well. So with that, let's begin with everyone offering a brief introduction of yourself and start with telling us something you would have done differently at your first Unbound. Let's start with you, Ted.
I am Ted King. I'm a proud member of the 1,000-Mile Club, having completed 5 Unbounds. I am the father of a 2-year-old daughter named Hazel. I am the husband to my wife, Laura. And what I would have done differently, my first one was 2016, and there were a spate of flat tires. And much like you'll probably hear about today, it's a good event to put in too much sealant as opposed to too little. I ran out of sealant, and that was a regretful decision in year 1.
Thank you. Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Ullmann. I raced 4 times and finished 3 of the times the 200. 2017 was my first year. It was a great year when I finished that year. However, I think I would have managed my time at the rest stops better. We were doing really well, but we just spent way too much time at the rest stops. And it's something that's easy to do.
Adrian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adrian Bennett. I'm joining you all from Los Angeles, California. And my field experience at this event's limited. I did it once in 2017, but what I bring to the table is also the experience of a coach, looking at your situation and making the actionable specifics of prep and participation more relevant to you as a rider. And as far as what I did wrong, I think hubris. This is not a 100-mile road race. It's a 200-mile road race, and it's not all really roads. So you ought to understand what you're doing and don't go out the gates too hot. And that's the mistake I made. Thank you.
All right, Jay.
My name is Jay Schuur. I'm not a professional cyclist. I'm an emergency room doctor and sort of a weekend warrior. I've done the Unbound 4 times, first in 2017, and going for the 1,000-Mile Club this year. And what I would have done differently is nutrition. The first year, I would not have packed 15 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with the thought that I could have eaten them, because I got to mile 100 and I never wanted to see a PB&J again. And I dug into a big Subway Italian sandwich and it was perfect.
All right, Pamela.
I'm Pamela Blalock. My experience with DK Unbound is crewing. So I have crewed for John and David Wilcox in 2013, and then John and Carl Ring in 2016. I've crewed on Ram qualifiers, Ram, and lots of other events as well. I'm also a cyclist. So one of the things I'll say is that there are a lot of things I'd rather do than crewing, like maybe, I don't know, have a mammogram or a colonoscopy or something. Crewing is not the most enjoyable thing unless your riders are generous with the words please and thank you. So that's what I will pass on to riders, is that they should never yell at their crew. They should say please and thank you lots, because that crew person may someday ask you to crew on Ram. So,
John.
Hi everyone, I'm John Bayley. I've ridden Unbound. I was still DK when I did it, but in 2013, 2016. I've registered for it 5 times, but only made it to the start line twice. Life got in the way in some relatively serious fashions on the other occasions. But regarding what I would do differently on my first one, that was definitely a case of look at the train timetable beforehand, because David Wilcox and myself were riding together. We got
Sorry.
stopped by trains not once, but twice, and on one leg, no less. So just after leaving a checkpoint and midway through the same section. The convenient thing was that in 2013, there was no GPS track. You kind of had to follow a map. And being stopped at that second train was actually very useful, because just a short distance further on, there was a turn that quite a number of other people missed. So that certainly, there was a little payback from the trains. But again, check the train timetables.
Excellent. So upon getting to Emporia, what's something that surprised you or you wished you had known going in to either logistics about arrival, the time in the day, registration, anything about logistics of your arrival? And we'll start with Ted.
I was lucky enough to have a mentor my first year. I had two mentors my first year. One was Rebecca Rush, who had won the event 4 times, and the other was Dan Hughes, who has won the event 4 times. So admittedly, I was naive going into my first, and they held my hand straight through, from registration, from arrival, from, even what airport you're going to fly into. My recommendation is therefore to do something like this. Have communication with folks who have done it before. You're going to learn one heck of a lot through your first event. It's the kind of event that you do once and you can immediately improve your time by 5%, by 10%, just through the experience of one. You might get to that first one and say, I'm never going to do it again, which I certainly said the first time. And it took about 11 and a half months to say, okay, yeah, I'll go back again. Definitely have someone with experience hold your hand getting through for all of the logistics, because the simplest thing that you're very accustomed to is admittedly quite foreign when you're going to this totally zany event in Emporia.
That's awesome.
I think taking ownership of all the unknowns, like you need to take ownership of your equipment, you need to take ownership of your nutrition, you need to take ownership of your lodging, and all those variables are going to be total unknowns. They're in a new location to you. And the most control you can maintain over all those variables is going to be an asset. Like think about it, right? The service departments in the bike shops within a 75-mile radius of this event are going to be absolutely slammed. There's not going to be any last minute service availability. And probably most services are basically going to be maxed out. This isn't a high density area. This is the thing happening here when y'all are here for this event. So you want to plan ahead. You want to come into the area with resources and really try to mentally surf all the variables and possible downfalls that might await you, to be prepared for as many as you can.
I think the shops, and you need to be prepared, but everybody I know has had some type of bike emergency, and the shops and the mechanics are happy to help you with small little things and try to get you through that. So don't freak out if you have a small problem. There is somebody there that can help you. I usually send an email like a week before and just say, do you have time to do like a safety check? So when I put my bike back together, just make sure that I've got everything dialed in perfectly and it's shifting perfectly. And usually they'll be able to do something like that for you. I think the other piece is to figure out, you're traveling and you're in a small town and you most likely haven't been there, what you're going to eat, and like what you think about what you're going to eat and how you're going to eat. Just take a look at the menus, take a look at the restaurants in the area. Like Jay and I stay at the dorms that they have in Emporia, which has a couple meals included with it. And that seems to work out pretty well because you have choices. It's important to be able to eat something that you're comfortable eating. You don't want to have this huge burrito, the day before you go out there.
Unless you do.
Yes.
Some can, some are professional.
That's right. Okay, that gets us into, let's talk about the morning routine. What is your morning routine for race day? And someone had questions about parking as well. If you're not staying really close to the course, what does that look like?
As a result of the event becoming incredibly popular, the town has reached its limits in terms of occupancy and hotels and so on and so forth. So I remember probably it was as early as maybe 2017 hearing about people who were staying as far away as Wichita, which I want to say is about an hour away. And truth be told, outside of the nuisance of coming down to get your registration the day before, it's not such a bad idea, because you're going to do everything early. you're going to wake up so early in Wichita or wherever you are that you can eat your breakfast and be digesting on that next subsequent hour-long drive. And then just anticipate parking is going to be a challenge. It's not impossible. It's small town America, so the parking lots will very soon fill up, and there on a Saturday morning at, call it 5 a.m. You'll end up street parking somewhere, and err on being early, because it's much like any other bike race where there's that fight for porta potties and all of the things.
The race before the race.
The thing I would add is for people who aren't, professionals doing this all the time, practice your morning routine in the next couple months when you're going out for your weekend rides, because you want to have the bike and everything set out the night before so you can just get up and go. And if the first time you do that is Friday night in Kansas, you're probably not going to do something right. So just make it a habit before you go out for those long rides to put everything together so you can wake up at 5:30 and be out of your house real quick. And then it's second nature.
So do you guys feel like a warm-up is necessary prior to the race, or does everyone start cold because it's going to be a long day out there?
As a amateur, I just ride from the dorms. No, I mean, I don't have a warm-up. The first bit, I'm stuck behind a bunch of people. You're just sort of holding on in a large pack. And so you get to warm up then. At least that's for me.
Adrian, do you have any perspective on that from how you started and as a coach?
I mean, best practices aside, the way to start this thing is to get to the line and stand there until you start. As far as that's what I did. And I don't think I saw anyone riding the trainer, unless you're trying to really establish some kind of tactical advantage because you've identified that you're in a tiny percentage of the elite. You don't need to be riding the trainer or riding around very much before you line up for this baby.
Ted, do you do anything differently considering how you approach the race and your goals typically going in?
No, I mean, we wouldn't warm up for Paris-Roubaix, so I'm not going to warm up for Unbound. And no, even at the sharp end of the race, the first, call it 25 miles, typically, at least when we're going in the northern direction, nothing really happens for the first 20 miles. So yeah, keep your powder dry. No need to do anything crazy. No need to warm up.
All right. Yeah.
Just in terms of between when you arrive and race day, if you do arrive early, I definitely recommend trying to ride the first 10 or 15 miles and the last 10 or 15 miles. You don't want to maybe do that much the day before, but if you're there on Thursday, it's a good idea. And this year it's going south. And if the route is the same, about 8 miles from the end, there's a sharp turn that goes onto a bridge. And if you happen to be there in the dark and you haven't done it before, it's one of those things you will have liked to have seen before.
So a typical race day could probably be anything. What has your experiences been with the wind and temperatures?
Yeah, I think with 5 of them, I've done each of the past 5 years, with the exception of a pandemic 2020. Anticipate it being hot. I certainly expect the unexpected. I imagine a lot of New Englanders are here on this call, so we know a thing or two about weather changing last minute. The picture over my shoulder is a delayed start after a pretty epic thunderstorm rolled through, and they delayed the start quite a bit. Anticipate hot, anticipate windy, a frustrating windy if you're going to do a final 100 miles into a headwind, but plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Specific, hot, like 95, maybe 100. And the thing that's real different, I think, for those of us from New England is no trees. And so make sure you're planning for sun. If you're not used to that, definitely sunscreen and maybe something on your arms or something else, because it is a lot of hours in the sun.
Good point. Okay, so we're going to move on to nutrition. There's going to be some other stuff that we touch on, especially where it comes to heat and heat management. So nutrition, this is huge, obviously. This is a big category. We're going to try to pare it down to the stuff that works for each of you. Help us with your experiences and the things that work for each of you. We had lots of questions about how many carbs or calories per hour you eat. Do you think about it in terms of how much you're eating per hour, or what is your fueling strategy as to how you're making sure you get enough food and water throughout the course of the day? While you're answering this question, please tell us about what you eat and drink.
I'll preface by saying I co-own a sports nutrition company called Untapped, which is based and founded on maple syrup. And I have done the past I think all 5 editions exclusively on Untapped, with a couple additions like a slice of pizza, some pickles here or there. I will take this to my grave. You will never have a stomach issue with maple syrup. A lot of people will take too many gels and they'll complain about gut rot. And that is never something we have ever heard from customers with maple syrup. There's something about its natural effects, naturally soothing recourse on your stomach. So practice consuming a heck of a lot of calories. I think in terms of calories per hour, I mean, I'm a big human. I'm 6'2". I'm consuming minimum 300 calories per hour through a mix of real foods like Untapped waffle, the maple syrup gels, and Maple Aid, our hydration product. Given that it is so hot and so windy and so exposed, I am erring on drinking more than I certainly normally can and normally want to, because at the end of this race, you're going to be so extremely dehydrated. It's wild. Personal preference is to not have the weight on my body. I prefer to have that on the bike. You're already probably going to have a lot of stuff in your pockets and so forth. So you don't want that extra weight on your sit bones that you're not accustomed to. So extra bottle cage. Yes, we are racing with hydration packs typically. I mean, that's sort of, I would say, inevitable outside of the possibility of going between the shortest distance between rest stops. But now they're at the point with just 2 rest stops as opposed to previous 3. So I'm speaking quickly and giving you a lot. Eat and drink early, eat and drink often, make that part of your routine, because you don't want to find yourself in a hole at hour 6, knowing that you're halfway or a third of the way or a quarter of the way into your race.
Awesome. That's great. Andrew, how about you?
So the first year I tried just having solid food with Jay, and we made like 27 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and then stuffed them in drop bags that sat and baked all day long. So by the time we got to the end, it was ridiculous. It was just like eating sand. So I've switched to liquid nutrition, and I use the Tailwind product. That's what I have been using. And what I try to do is about 250 calories an hour, and I cramp a lot. So I carry 4 water bottles on my bike, and I don't do the backpack because I just didn't like the backpack. This year, I'm thinking about mixing it up and actually having the backpack for the first leg, the hydration pack, because it's going to be easier to drink with all the people around, and then ditching it as the sun comes up so I don't have that extra heat on my back. I think I did the last DK with maybe 2 bars, and everything else was liquid nutrition. And it was a bit hot, and I didn't mix enough water to start with. You know, I got to mix a bit of water in with it. I think Jay can tell a story about mixing water in with it. So I would say you have to practice with it. I guess that's the other part, is you just have to practice. You have to be comfortable with a couple 8-9 hours of, drinking liquid nutrition.
That's good. Adrian.
So I think the theme that I really like from everyone so far is to not be doing anything new in the field for the first time. If you're trying some new food for the first time in this event, I think something probably went wrong. Like, I know it could be hard to source things and there will be rest stop assist, but even if you're a time crunched rider, if you're preparing for this thing over the course of the springtime as is necessary, you're going to be doing long enough weekend rides to sort of simulate the nutrition plan. And I really recommend it being a dress rehearsal on all the training rides, to where everybody's answers to these kinds of questions are different. Like, people's caloric intake ceiling per hour, is limited by their own GI system. And what's probably true for everybody is that it's going to be impossible to consume as many calories as you'll burn. It's probably pretty much inevitable to end this thing in some state of deficit. So the question isn't so much how many calories should you digest, it's how many calories can you digest, also in adverse conditions. And so that's why the trying this stuff out in the field before the event is so important. You want to know that your specific gut can tolerate whatever plan you have for it. One thing is important is hyponatremia, which is a condition where you do hydrate adequately, but you don't have enough vital salts and electrolytes. That could be a danger in an event like this, where you're sweating a lot and you're out there exposed for a long time. So you want to make sure that whether it's pickles, whether it's some kind of electrolytes, that's also being supplemented as well as water. For me doing this, I would say that I made mistakes, and I like the hydration packs because I think the penalty of having the thing on your back is way lower than the sort of rationing that can take place when you're aware of a scarce water supply. Having 3 cages on the bike is great, maybe even 4. I was running 3 cages, and I was doing this thing back when there was still the 3 rest stops. As far as the mixes in the bottles, I like the idea of liquid nutrition. One thing to consider with that is that it can kind of cheapen the wateriness of one's water. So if you're, adding something to bottles of water, and especially a high enough density or a carbohydrate mixture or something, consider that that bottle of water may not have the same sort of hydration potential it did before it became a liquid sandwich. I like solid foods and I like non-traditional foods that are not packaged nutrition. I was eating things like potato chips and sandwiches and all the rest on this. But really, there's no right answer to this. It's about field testing and vetting your own menu so that going into this, there's not any wild cards. You have it all pre-planned, pre-rehearsed, and you know yourself and you know what you can handle, so you don't try to say, oh man, Ted's eating 300 calories per hour. That's the benchmark. I got to hit that. And 3 hours later, 900 calories later, your gut's in turmoil because you can't actually process that. So that's why it's so important to shake this stuff down.
Just one quick addition. I mentioned the pizza. I'm the kind of person who goes for a bike ride, no matter where I am, what time of year, whatever it is. If I'm going to refuel on the ride, I want something on the scale of sweet to savory. I eat sweet. I eat cookies. I eat muffins. I eat maple syrup. I'll never on a traditional bike ride eat chips or a sandwich or pizza. When you are seeing cross-eyed at mile 150, your taste is going to be so backwards that you want something that you don't know right now that you want. So I've learned this lesson. I want something salty at a mile 150 because I know that it's so unexpected. That's something I want. So, great point with Adrian. I mean, practice your nutrition and practice and practice and practice. It's hard to put yourself in such a deficit in training that you will find yourself in racing. So expect the unexpected, and much like erring on being early, err on having too many calories, too much hydration, too much stuff at your feed zones so that you can load up and be ready to go.
Awesome. Good point. Pamela.
I have a note in my crew notes that, as crew, you'll want sandwiches and chips and caffeinated drinks and such. And you should be prepared when your rider comes in and says, I want that, to give it to them, because they may have set up all this liquid nutrition and gels and everything else. But when they come in and they see your chips and your sandwich, they may want it, and you have to hand it to them. So it's just have some of that unusual stuff that you're going to have for yourself and have spares of it so you can give it to them.
John, what about you?
Well, I suppose on that note, one of the culinary highlights of my life doing Boston one year was chicken McNuggets. Something I wouldn't normally touch if you paid me, but they were the best thing ever. And then let me see. So I did pack tour maybe a couple of times way back when, so a long distance bike ride or across the US, run by Lon Haldeman, who had run RAM a few times in the past. And so I picked Lon's brain about, what should I eat, blah, 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 because I wanted to do some RAM qualifiers. And what I didn't know at the time was, or maybe I knew but didn't really relate it to myself, was that Lon just has this ironclad stomach and can eat anything and any amount of it, and it won't upset his stomach. And he says, oh yeah, liquid nutrition, 500 calories an hour. So I go do a RAM qualifier. Give me 500 calories per hour. Well, 500 calories per hour do not stay down very long for me, but I'll keep it family friendly and leave it the rest to your imagination.
Well, I can say
don't.
that this is one of the things, is that you share with your crew what you're supposed to do. And with John's very fragile stomach and him saying he needed a bottle of this thing and a bottle of that thing every hour, at some point when he wasn't going through it all, I'm like, no, John, you have to catch up. Here, drink more. And it came out every way it possibly could come out. So I have learned that with John, is that one is his stomach is fragile, and two, that when he stops eating and drinking certain things, don't force it on him.
Excellent. Jay, do you have anything to add to the subject?
I would emphasize definitely practicing, despite good job practicing eating ahead of time. All through the spring, I set a little timer on my bike computer for 30 or 45 minutes and just force myself to eat, because typically when I go out for like a 2 or 3 hour ride, I won't eat very much, but I get in the habit of doing that. Despite that, every Unbound has had some feeding issue for me. In 2019 was probably the worst. I decided to do a chocolate-based liquid nutrition. And because I liked the taste of plain water, I figured I'd mix up one bottle with 4x concentrated chocolate liquid nutrition. And I could take little sips of that and then drink water. And in the cool spring of New England, that worked. But when you get about 95 degrees in Kansas, chocolate pudding is really not very appetizing. And so I had to sort of change my nutrition mid ride. The only other thing I would strongly suggest reading something about salt and making sure that you know your salt needs. I personally sweat a lot. So in addition to a liquid nutrition with electrolytes, I take salt pills, and that's helped because you'll drink 20 bottles over the course of the ride.
Thank you all. That's really good information. Now we're going to switch to training. So preparing for Unbound, tell us about how you train in a cold climate for an event that takes place in a hot climate. And it happens really early in the year, in the beginning of June. So tell us about your training challenges, as well as how you fit training into your life, assuming you have other demands on your time. And I think this probably applies to absolutely everyone here on the panel. Quite a few people sent in questions saying, hey, I have 4 to 8 hours a week to train. I know that was interesting how many people said that I've got 4 to 8 hours to train a week. Can I do something like the 200-mile Unbound? So Ted, we'll start with you.
Yes, you can make it through on 4 to 8 hours. One of my partners at Untapped is the father of 4 children. He's on our town select board. He's on the volunteer fire department. He coaches every one of his kids' sporting events. And I think he went into the 2021 Unbound. I'm confident he had done the least preparation and the least training of anybody there, and he got through it. I think being realistic with your time, he was probably doing 3 hours a week, if he's lucky, with a child in front of him or behind him on the bike. You know, this question will end up more in the hands of an Adrian. I mean, someone who has extensive coaching background. I mean, yeah, you cannot fake endurance. So you're going to need to do some big endurance rides. Being realistic about your goals, I think is a huge preface. Yeah, I mean, I'm in a challenging state. I own a couple businesses, which has a heck of a lot of work. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I travel a lot, and I'm trying to be competitive. And I'm being competitive against the folks who are treating this purely as professional bike racing again. So I need to switch my own mental state now and again and not live in a world of FOMO and say, okay, this is my controlled environment leading into it. This is everything I'm going to be able to do. Let's make the most of it. On the heat aspect, I did spend a little time in a last ditch effort. Who knows if it actually works, in a sauna leading up to the event last year. I finished 4th last year, so I can't say it didn't work. I wouldn't do anything as crazy as putting a trainer in the sauna, but yeah, I think it was a particularly cool spring here. So that was a slap to the face to get to Emporia, just how hot it was.
Thank you. Andrew.
I'm a father of 2. My daughter plays competitive hockey, so that's a lot of driving from this place to that place, and working full time. So I find that I'm getting up really early and riding on the trainer in the winter because that's the time I have. And so I'll try to put in 1 or 2 hours in the morning before everybody else wakes up, because I kind of think that's my time. Nobody else is up, then I'm not taking away. And then on the weekends, Jay's my riding partner, and we'll get up early and we'll go out, when it's dark, and start our long rides so that we get back by 1 or 2 o'clock on the really long rides. So that the other things, when you get back, you need to be part of the family. And so it's like, okay, great. Want to go for a hike with the family? Great. Let's take a walk or do something like that. I mean, it's important to make sure that, at least with my kids, that they know it's important to me, but they know it's not, that it's more important to me to be bike riding. So in terms of heat and things like that, I mean, because everybody was in the pandemic and I was working from home, I brought my trainer out in my driveway on like the 3 hot days and rode at lunch, just so that I was at least in the sun riding, because I can't turn the heat up in my house like that, which looked pretty ridiculous, but who knows if it helped. But at least maybe at least feel like, okay, I've got a sweat going and I'm under the sun.
Sounds good. Adrian, perspective of a coach, what do people do to train for the heat?
I really like what you had to say there, Andrew. I think that's a really good example of how you can kind of take a look at your life situation and carve out chunks in it to really optimize what you can get done while still respecting your many roles and the tertiary or lower ranking cycling has in that hierarchy. So for folks who are time crunched and professionals and parents and trying to figure out how to get this done, I'd really say that time management wise, the stuff Andrew had to say is pretty gold. As far as the heat goes, it's a case of ideal versus real. Everybody here is going to be limited in some capacity. Yeah, what's the best thing you could do would be go to some environment that's just as close to Kansas in June as you can possibly get and be hanging out there training for the 6 weeks before this thing. How many people on this call are going to be able to do something like that? Probably 0 to 1% of them. So you're going to be working in a compromised operating condition. And that's okay. I would encourage you, if you've trained up and you've been up there in Maine and it hasn't been within 25 degrees Fahrenheit of what you'll be seeing in Kansas, you should still go down there and see what you can get done. I definitely can't advocate for any kind of aerobic activity inside saunas or anything like that. I think that's a good call to draw the line there. You know, heat acclimatization is something that you can study, and I'm fairly ignorant about it scientifically, so I don't feel like I'm qualified to comment beyond what I've already said. I think it's really just a case of the fact that the best practices for heat acclimatization for folks from this region aren't even going to be accessible. So you just got to have to accept that as an area where the program is compromised. In that, I will have a quick little addition to the time crunch thing, which is that, I mean, heck, if Ted's friend is a great example of like what's possible, and some of that does come down to the individual and their kind of genetic allotment in this life. I don't make promises to my coaching clients about what they're going to be able to do. You know, they take ownership of that. It's always a gamble. And going on to this thing with 4 hours of training a week on average is like going into the casino with your last 10 grand kind of thing. Like, it might not work out for you, but I would say it's worth a try. You know, if you listen to your body and you can feel an overuse injury or something like that coming on, you might surprise yourself. But I'd say with 8, you know, that's really pretty realistic to be able to get it done. And the quality becomes important. And one of the kind of counterintuitive things is that you're going to want to spend some of that time riding at a higher intensity than you're going to ride at during the race. And so you're not like, you know, full on criterium, road racing, threshold, beatdown type interval training, but some of the kind of interval training they call, you know, sweet spot training, a little bit sub threshold, spending some longer durations at that intensity is a good way to kind of bring up it's the second best thing to the sort of really long, steady distance, traditional base mile riding at huge hours that would be probably the ideal phase 1 of prep for something like this. So there's a lot of good literature out there on being a time crunched athlete and trying to get prepped for long endurance stuff, and the kind of quality time, little time at sweet spot, and doing the kinds of rides like Andrew mentioned, where it's like, hey, yeah, if we leave at 4:30 a.m., you know, we'll be back at 1:30, and you just got to factor it in. Yeah, you're going to need to drink your recovery shake, eat a sandwich, take a shower, and go mow the lawn or something like that, you know? So be real about it. We're not professionals here. And so you're going to need to make compromises. One of the worst things a person can do is look at the training that someone like, you know, Lawrence Tendam or Ted here, even though he's also a professional and multifaceted guy, you can't be trying to emulate epic, huge volume training when you're a time crunch professional and parent. That's going to be too much, right? They're in the power analysis, there's a term called chronic training load, which is like how much you've done. And it's informed by something called the training stress score, which is all derived from power data. And I like to talk about something called the life stress score, which is basically the training load that your life stressors impose on you. And so you need to have a holistic balance. It might be someone who thinks they can train 15 hours a week for this thing, might be better off training 7 to 10 on a lot of those weeks, because that's actually going to be what gets them rested up and properly balanced in their kind of holistic wellness department. So there's some thoughts for you on volume and what to do with the time you have.
Awesome. We have a follow-up question, and Adrian, I think this one's perfect for you. Someone would like to know, what's the absolute must do in a training plan? And some people asked, what if I don't have time to do a 200-mile ride in advance, thinking that a 200-mile ride in advance is necessary going into Unbound? What would you say the must-dos of a training plan?
Must-dos are consistency, as much volume as you can fit while maintaining the holistic life balance I discussed. And I think what they call, what the popular parlance nowadays is like some sweet spot interval training would be my personal recommendation. And could you repeat that? I wouldn't be worried about not being able to ride a preparatory double century. In fact, many would say that's unnecessary or even ill-advised. It's probably going to be perfectly adequate to do a ride that's within sort of 70% of your projected elapsed time for this thing. That'd be my take.
Jay, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add 2 things. One thing, I echo everything Andrew said, and don't beat yourself up when you miss a day of training, because it will happen. So I have a training plan, and I'm an emergency room doctor. I've got a family. Stuff happens. It's like 9 o'clock at night, and I have to decide if I'm going to get on the trainer or not. And I just say, not today, but I'll do it tomorrow. And then the other thing I would say is, my personal view is ride the bike you're going to ride in Kansas. for a while beforehand, because many people, if you live in the Northeast, you might have a road bike and you're mostly riding on the roads, and then you're like, oh, I'll ride this bike in Kansas. But you really want to, particularly on those long rides, get really familiar with your bike and make sure everything is dialed in. The best way to do that is do that on your training rides.
Sounds good. John and Pamela, do you have anything to add?
I think the one thing I might emphasize doing, especially for a first timer and perhaps someone living in New England, is just to focus on trying to find windy days to ride and riding into that wind. And just to kind of give you a kind of extreme example of that was in 2016, a couple of friends of mine decided to do the Farmer's Daughter ride in upstate New York. Well, I didn't do the ride, but what I did was, and it just happened to be a hellaciously windy day, and especially heading from the Boston area towards, actually, well, I was living in Greenfield at the time, heading from Greenfield to upstate New York. It was into a headwind the whole way, and it just felt like a really good thing to do preparing for Kansas. So, you might normally be inclined to dodge the wind or whatever. It's just kind of a natural reflex, but embrace it.
Awesome.
And I totally agree with that. So what I heard more from the riders was about the wind than the heat, even though it was brutally hot. Just that 100 miles of headwind just saps, it takes all the wind out of your sails. It just, if you've done a lot of it, then it's good. So here, what John was saying, we tend to ride up into the hills when it's windy and on the tiny little roads that are tree covered. And I'd say, hey, go down to the valley and get yourself into the wind. So while you can't do the heat, you can do the wind in New England.
All right, awesome. Pamela, more questions for you. And there weren't actually many questions about this, but likely something that people need to put a lot of energy into, and that is training their support crew. What should support crew know going in? A lot of times support crew is a friend who isn't a cyclist. What do you suggest for the support crew? What the crew should do? What should they have available for the riders? And there's 2 rest stops on the way where crew members are allowed to crew for their riders. So what advice do you have to share along those lines?
So one of the things is if you're asking someone to crew for you, you better be committed to do the whole thing. And that you should not ask someone to fly to Kansas and spend their weekend doing this if you're going to get in the car. I will not let anybody in the car. So I've told John and Carl and everyone else, I'll take your bike, you go home in an ambulance. You cannot get in the car. So one of the things Rebecca Rush talked about that I have taken to heart is to hide the chair. So I have a chair that I sit in while I'm waiting, but before the rider comes in, I hide the chair. Although I did take it back out when Carl looked really bad. So one of the things, I mentioned this before, is you need to tell your crew what your nutrition needs are. So I would typically have a musette bag, and I'd have the bottles, I'd have a hydration pack, I'd have whatever food or gels or whatever in it. So I'd also have tracked my riders. So the first year we used a spot tracker, and then in the next year, I think we were either using the phone or the GPS or something, so that I could tell when the rider was coming in. Carl did not have this, so I wasn't really prepared when Carl, or, I was, but I wasn't to the minute, he's going to be here at this time. But with John, I could actually look on my phone and track him and see when he was coming in. And I also did this thing where I was able to send a text to him that showed up on his GPS, and I could say, hey, I'm just past the checkpoint on the left, and we had big orange flags or something, or we could have had a team flag over the car so that they could find me. But typically I would be up at the checkpoint with the musette. One of the things we did was John had drink mix in his bottles and then water in his hydration pack, and I could keep those things separate. But he'd come in, I'd pull the bottles off, put new bottles in, hand him the hydration pack, hand him take the trash and stuff away. And so you don't need to be a cyclist to do this. I might wipe the chain off with a paper towel and put some lube on. You don't need to be a cyclist to necessarily know how to do that. And because this isn't a follow car event, it's a checkpoint where you're meeting them at checkpoints. The rider needs to know how to do mechanical things, needs to know how to fix flats and all. So a crew will not likely be doing any of that sort of thing. At the most, they might have a pump in the car or some spare parts in the car that the rider would end up taking care of. So you can absolutely have somebody as your crew who doesn't necessarily know this. The other thing is the bottles are going to be muddy. So wipe the bottles off before you put them back in the cooler. I say have at least 3 bottles for every cage that's on the bike, because they'll have the bottles on the bike, then you'll have bottles ready for them, and then you should have spare in case they've lost a bottle or 2 along the way. And so I had extra water just to wash mud off the bottles. And then I had 2 coolers. One had ice in it and the other one had ice packs in it. The ice was for riders to eat ice or put in ice socks or something to drape around their neck. And then the ice packs were what I would have the coolers, or have for the water bottles to be cooling while they're waiting. And then again, that just knowing how to look at somebody who looks awful and tell them they look good and they look strong and keep going. But knowing the difference between, I think Lon Haldeman told us this, temporary pain and permanent pain, when to actually, agree with them that yes, it is okay to stop, because what you've done is going to cause you some permanent damage, versus, oh, you've got a little saddle sore, here, put some cream on it and keep going. And being able to just be rigid and say, no, you cannot get in the car. Yes, you have to keep going. Yes, you look strong, you look good, when they don't. And then when I was rereading Carl's thing, he did not have lights permanently mounted on his bike, and he left the last control without his lights and ended up finishing up in the dark. So if your rider is in danger of finishing in the dark, or is planning to finish in the dark and doesn't have their lights, make sure you have their lights on their bike at that final control.
And if I can make a point about the lights. So we had somebody who Jay and I had ridden with, and they got some mechanicals and got behind. They had their lights in their bag or with their crew for this, but they didn't make it in the daylight, and the course pulled them off. They pulled them off because they didn't have lights. So they're going to disqualify you if you don't have your lights and you need them. So just carry at least a light. You can carry a spare light or have it in a drop bag or with your crew, but that's just a horrible way to have your day end, especially if you fought through all the mechanicals. You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
The race will actually pull you off the course and drive you back to the start. And that would also apply to someone who doesn't make the time cut. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it was, probably the same people.
I'll just mention one thing just while I think of it. Pamela's mentioned the water bottles reminded me. I would say don't skip on water bottle cages. You're going to have more big hits out riding on the roads in Kansas than a few. And it's really dispiriting to have a water bottle go flying off somewhere and you're in a fast group or something like that. You don't want to stop and go back and retrieve it. You may not even notice that it's gone. So don't skip on water bottle cages. And then just a mention, a favorite thing of mine, I only discovered these last year, so I haven't used them at DK, but polar water bottles that have a really nice cap that goes over the nozzle for putting it in your mouth, just when you're riding through field or along roads with cattle having been all over them and stuff. Well, it's just a nice little extra, and then the polar water bottles are insulated as well, or at least some of them are. So
Yeah.
Yeah, can I make a comment? For those of us who didn't have a dedicated crew, you can use the crew for hire, and it works out quite well. I would just recommend, if it's your first time going, talking to someone who's used the crew for hire, so you know how it works, and that'll help you decide what to put in each of your bags, and it will also help you decide how to use your time when you get there, because they'll fill up your water bottles. There is some food there. There's, a light service if they need to, look at a chain or something like that. But sort of knowing ahead of time what you want in those bags, what you're going to do when you get there, will really pay off.
I just
want me to
want
jump in with a couple of quick comments along these lines. I really like what you had to say about the being on a support crew, Pamela. And one thing I thought I'd mention that's sort of lined up is like, you're a teammate you're part of the race effort on that support crew. And it's important, I think, to communicate as athletes and support teammates to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page, expectations are managed, and like a game plan is in place. A rider who's going to be going for a fast elapsed time in this event is going to have really different support crew needs than a rider who's going to need maybe some emotional support and some coaching and a sort of safe resting place. And so depending on what kind of dynamic you have as a support team member, certain variables will be more or less important. Perhaps having a bunch of nutrition and chilled bottles pre-staged for the most efficient handoff possible will be important. Perhaps having perhaps the chair being hidden won't necessarily be the best thing for everybody. I knew when I horribly miscalibrated my effort and was in a complete disarray at the then third checkpoint, I needed a little chair time to get back on the horse. And I'm not saying that that's what you should plan on, but it might happen to you. And the one
I took the chair out. I did let them sit down at the third checkpoint.
And I guess along those lines, actually, I forget what the last thing I was going to say. So don't worry about it. I'll chime in if I think of it.
Just one that rest stop thing, to have the socks, have extra socks in case you feel like you need extra socks, because sometimes you want to change your socks because they're soaking wet and you're uncomfortable. Another is you want to be able to have bags or something full of ice that you can put on your back to just try to help cool you down. And those muddy bottles aren't just mud. So I ended up coming home with a little critter inside my stomach from Kansas one year. And I got giardia from drinking out of the water bottles. It's not fun. It's also not easy to necessarily diagnose. So what I do with my lowest water bottle is I actually take like a dog waste bag and stick it over the top and put rubber bands over it. And so when I actually go to use it, I'm taking that bottle and I'm unscrewing the top and I'm pouring it in my upper cage bottles just so that I don't come in contact with it, because you're going to go through river crossings, huge puddles and stuff like that. And it's all going to splash up. You want to be careful with that.
Andrew, I'm glad you mentioned that. A lot of this is open range, and it's really easy for, a lot of that is from the bovine animals droppings, cattle droppings, those are known contaminants. I really like your contamination management strategy. I did the similar thing where the under the down tube bottle is kind of a hazmat category. Yeah. And you've piqued my memory. The other thing I wanted to mention in the lines of really clever, important things to have at rest stops, a la spare socks, is going back to the nutrition department for a moment and some of our comments about non-traditional foods that are only going to be desired under extreme duress, like pizza or chips. When you're packing your drop bags for these aid stations, you want to, in addition to or perhaps in your support crew nutritional stash, whichever zone these are being placed in addition to your staple resupply nutritionals, you want to have a whole separate roster that's not part of the calorie plan, that's like the Hail Mary stuff. I coach some ultra athletes who do really, 100-mile runs and stuff like that. And one strategy we have is that there's the snacks you plan to eat, and then there's the snacks you don't plan to eat, but they're there when things get nasty. And so I'd really recommend stashing some of that category in your various caches that you'll encounter throughout this day.
Excellent. All right, so you sort of touched on heat management. Is there other things you employ to deal with the heat during the day, or the wind? The ice at the rest stop sounds really nice. Anything else anyone does special?
So I followed Ted my second year and did not wear a dark blue jersey and found a nice white Flocho jersey because it was a lot cooler. So you want something that really breathes. I ended up getting like golfing arm covers, like the thinnest ones I could find just to cover my arms, just the thinnest materials. You want to make sure that you have the least amount of clothing you can have and still stay somewhat sun protected. Jay, I mean, you've had some, maybe you can talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a really pale guy, so particularly in June, 12 hours in the sun will do a number on me. So I wear a brimmed hat under my helmet. I have the arm covers and then sunscreen in the morning and at least once more during the day.
While Jay covered the head, I'll go to the feet because in 2016, I decided to wear a pair of lace-up Giros that were quite a snug fit, and they felt great training in New England. Went out to Kansas, baking hot, and I couldn't easily adjust the tension or the laces on the fly or anything. My feet swelled up, and I had the sorest feet I've ever had. So I think it's a good idea to have some shoes that have a little bit of breathing space for your feet, and something like boa dials or whatever that you can adjust easily as your feet might swell.
So how are the stream crossings? They sound quite nice. We're talking about peak. Do you ride through them? Do you walk through them? How does this go? Ted, I'd love to hear from you and then hear what a typical person is going to do in those situations.
Oh, sorry.
I can picture, it was that year, 2018, that we walked across a particular stream. Early on, there are more gullies, and yeah, you see a lot of those are the areas at which you have, I think, a higher risk of contracting Giardia, for example. You go through a lot of just a mellow stream crossing that you're not going to think anything of until 12 hours later. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I did 3 stream crossings in the first 60 miles. They are to be aware of. I mean, the deeper ones, the one that I'm picturing in 2018 was the trail descended. It's a concrete area, and we walked it because it was slippery, in short. I mean, do what the folks around you are doing. That is to say, don't follow the person who has slipped out and is going down the stream. I don't know, err on the side of caution. There's no massive river crossing, so there's nothing enormous to be worried about. And so, yeah, a couple seconds here or there, sacrifice those to get off to the other side safely, at which point you're going to get to the subsequent feed zone and have that nice clean pair of socks that will make you very happy. And real quick, clothing. Yeah, I mean, we keep on airing on it's going to be a really hot day. I've never had an experience at Unbound in Emporia that has not been hot. So yeah, don't wear your traditional spring clothes in New England. Air on wearing, Velocio, for example, is my clothing sponsor. They make really great, super hot weather clothing. So air on the thinnest, lightest bibs, jerseys, gloves. Arm screens are awesome.
Great. Anybody else have anything on that?
I could chime in on not too much else to add. I mean, of course, complicating on the conditions, like had a friend do this back, I think 14 or 15, and it was a heavy rains, and that mud will rip your drivetrain right off. So of course, all this stuff we're saying could be totally wrong. You go out there and those roads could be just total clay mud. But for the creek crossings, I like what everyone said. Like, yeah, if you're racing at the front of this thing, that's going to probably matter, but you're probably also not the audience wondering about creek crossings. Consider the cost benefit analysis of wide open throttle creek crossing when you're not a confident handler or you don't have a good line of sight. Just like a wide open road descent, you probably don't want to be right on somebody's wheel heading across that creek. You're going to want to be able to see if you can hook your eyeballs on the creek bed and choose a good line across it. When I did it, we were crossing them and there were some nearly hub deep. Definitely that asphalt laid crossing, that's all covered in moss. Again, consider the penalty of taking a real hard hip hit on that, greasy underwater concrete versus just walking across that thing. Be safe, be smart. But, and I guess generally too is like, we have a probably pretty diverse audience with a big different, varied background of cycling experience. And for some of you, this may be one of the more technical events you've done, though it's not a mountain bike race or even mountain biking. There's off-camber sections. There's some sections where the line that's viable is, just a foot or two wide. There's, so in a kind of going back to the training thing, see if you can get yourself some exposure to a creek crossing in your training. See if you can get yourself some exposure to some really nasty off-camber, rutted out B roads that are full of gullies and drainage lines and stuff like that, to where you could start feeling like you have an experience-based answer to some of those questions about what do I do about a creek crossing? What do I do about a really nasty rutted out section of road, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to comfort, and then we're going to get to equipment. A lot of people have a lot of equipment questions that we want to get to, but comfort sounds like it's pretty important given the long day. So tell us things that you had like discomfort with. Obviously the touch points, hands, feet, saddle, and what recommendations you have for staying more comfortable. And we've got some questions about suspension stems, suspension seat post, or other suspension of the bike. We will get to equipment and like tire size, because obviously there's comfort associated with that too in the next section. So anything you guys would like to offer? We'll start with you, Ted.
I mean, practice the great point made earlier, ride the bike that you're going to ride. Try to ride that bike a lot. I mean, I do that in general. It might be faster, it might be more fun to ride a road bike, but right now I'm paying more attention to riding the bike that I'm going to be competing on. Also said earlier, great point, your feet will very likely swell. I have done the exact same thing wearing a lace-up shoe, and you pay a penalty when your feet are screaming. So an easily adjustable shoe and something that you're going to air probably up in terms of size, a nice thin sock. Yeah, nothing new. Those have been mentioned, but I can't really reiterate them enough.
I believe someone suggested, and I don't think I heard it yet, is new chamois cream at rest stops. Like that's a helpful thing to get through the day.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for me, that's a pressure point that I need to readdress at rest stops, because being uncomfortable is, it's not good. The other one comfort thing that I have is when I'm wearing my contacts and I'm riding, I sweat a lot. And so I use one of the sweat diverting strips, which just keeps some of the sweat out of my eyes, because late in the day, you know, your eyes just start getting, if you're in the sun, hopefully in the sun, and it's just blasting your eyes and you get all that salt and all that in there. It just helps.
Nice. John, do you have any?
I kind of do something similar to Andrew. I basically will always end up wearing a super lightweight cap under my helmet as well, because I sweat like crazy as well. And, you know, I'll be out there in Kansas and sweat is coming off the brim of the hat, keeps it out of my eyes. That's good. The main other thing I think I'd mention perhaps is what I try to do is, even early in the ride, consciously move around on the bike a lot, get out of the saddle, things like that. Just kind of stretch the muscles, just vary things as much as possible. Just especially with, you know, some of the real headwinds sections, it's very easy just to get stuck in one position for a long time, and you know, that doesn't help your neck. And then just do a few things like when the surface is safe, to just try and stretch out the upper body a little bit, keep the shoulders and neck from getting too tight, because again, just when you're stuck in one position for a long time, that can kind of creep up on you.
Sounds good. We've got a question about what saddles everyone uses. Now I'm going to start, because I've found the Shimano Pro off-road saddle to be quite good. And a lot of gravel saddles are covered, as we've had questions about women's saddles and the cutout on women's saddles. And a lot of the gravel saddles are covered, so you're not like, you know, spewing slop up on yourself. I mean, large saddlebags will also take care of that. Feel free to tell us what you're riding.
So I ride a Specialized saddle, and I actually don't even know what model it is. But the interesting thing is I had a fancy saddle that looked good and stuff, and then I went and got my bike fit, and it turned out that saddle was too narrow. And so I've got a Specialized saddle, and I have the Connect Cirrus hinged seat post, which I think is amazing. I'm not sponsored by them, but it really does wonders in terms of reducing tension on your bottom over many miles.
I'll have one for the audience. It really doesn't matter to you what we like and what we run, because what matters to you is what's going to work for you in the field, and that's going to be specific to you. So we might be able to accidentally point you in a helpful direction, but frankly, and I like what you just had to say there, Jay, about the width, right? There's these unique anatomical attributes to all of us, like the span between our sit bones, that are going to be pretty significant determinants of what saddle we're running. So just like we've been hitting on, you got to be putting miles on the bike you're running in this event starting yesterday. And you got to have that saddle selected starting yesterday. And if stuff's not working for you, dive into the specifics of your body and your needs rather than asking on folks what they're running, because it's not going to help you.
If I didn't have to answer one question the rest of my life, it's, what saddle are you running? It drives me crazy for that exact reason. Like, my body is different than everybody on this panel, is different than everybody listening. And people want to pick a saddle based on aesthetics. Just, it drives me bonkers. So what am I riding? I'm not even going to tell you.
And hey, one other quick thing on this point is, you know, if you're running drop handlebars on this event, which I would suspect the majority of participants are running, it's not the time for the fashion slam. like if you're not utilizing the drop area of your handlebars in headwind scenarios and handling scenarios, perhaps those handlebars should look a little less cool and be a little higher up. Just something, because it's a long day out there, and comfort matters more than aero, because comfort makes power when you're tired.
So
I can't-
I'll jump in on the female saddle. If you're riding a saddle with a cutout in it now, you should continue riding a saddle with a cutout in it. So for a couple of reasons. One, rocks are not flying up through that cutout. I ride a saddle with a cutout in it, ride gravel and all over the place, and have never had anything come up through the hole in the saddle. The other thing is when it's hot, that hole actually does provide a little cooling effect. And if you've been riding one with a hole in it, you should continue riding one with a hole in it. But I'll agree with what everybody else said. Don't ask me what I'm riding, what you're comfortable with, what's the right width for you, what's the right saddle for you. Just keep riding that saddle. So.
And I'll just simply echo Adrian's comment about riding in the drops. It perhaps ties in with my earlier recommendation to try riding in headwinds wherever you can. But one comment that sticks in my mind after the first time I was out in Kansas was, I never rode in the drops so much of my life. So just make sure that you're comfortable in that position. So.
Excellent. All right, let's just move on to equipment, because questions about the drops lead us to aero bars or no aero bars. This was a big question that came in from people. Whoever has an opinion strongly one way or the other, let's hear from you.
So I don't run full aero bars. I have these little ride far little mini clip-on aero bars. It's like, doesn't even get past the drop, past the hoods. What I like about it is it's another position for my hands. It gives me a place to do this. It brings my elbows in a little bit, and I'll spend a bit of time there and I'll spend a bit of time out here. I'm not gaining any major advantage in having it, and I'm not going to be riding it for the first 30 to 50 miles because there's just too many people around, and you got to have control, and hand on a brake. So I like it because it's just another position, but I put it on like in April and take it off in June, and I don't use it all summer long on my bike. I just use it for this event.
All right. Ted, we've seen pictures of you with and without.
Yeah, I think Andrew's point is perfect. I am not a fan of aero bars when they relate to, we just had snowfall off the roof. Go Vermont. When they're used in a pack, I think that is dangerous. Hopefully cool heads and some realistic thinking prevails. But there are plenty of people who literally will not see the finish line were it not for aero bars. And I think aero bars can be a huge benefit. They are unequivocally faster. So the only thing I would really say is be smart and safe about using them. It will be windy. Don't get blown straight from the skis onto your side. If everyone in the top 100 didn't use them, I would be perfectly happy. I have used them, admittedly, and that is purely for speed, and it's keeping up on the Joneses.
All right, that's great. Anybody else on that one? We've got lots of equipment questions though. So if no one else has anything, all right, now wheel size, 650V or 700C, tire size, how wide you ride, which tires. This is a little bit easier for you to say what it is that you're riding. Tire pressure, everyone wants to know tire pressures. You can feel free to tell us what you ride, but I don't think that applies to everyone because everyone's a different weight and has different equipment. So let's hear from you. What are you riding? And also talk about your gearing, because I would imagine what you have on your bike is what you think is right. But if you would make any changes to your setup, we'd love to hear about that. Who wants to start? Ted?
Sure, I will kick it off. I have run 650. I am currently running 700. I'll probably continue with that. If you read Bicycle Quarterly, which I highly recommend, it will show that it is a toss-up between 650 and 700, and you're really not gaining an advantage one way or the other. A nice wide tire is something that I recommend. We can go into details here and there about which tire, this, that, and the other. Use the strongest tire you can. Use a tire that is going to be ultra endurance. I happen to use a Renee Hare's 44 mil Snoqualmie Pass, which is a slick. I might be the only person to have run a slick last year, in the right conditions, because the cornering is so few and far between. I'm perfectly comfortable on a very wide slick, which has a massive footprint, and I'm not worried about the need for knobs. If it is damp, if we're having rain on the day, then maybe I would go for a knob. I've run 2x, I've run 1x. I am really happy running the same bike that I'm going to run at Unbound, that I'm going to run at a variety of other gravel races, which as of the past 2 years, I've been running a 1x46 front, eagle in the back. That's a huge range. A lot of folks who've never done Unbound think that it is a flat course, and anyone who has done Unbound know that it's anything but flat. The hills are short and steep and abrupt, and you're going to use every tooth on the easiest cog you have.
You have a 1050 cassette?
I have the 1050. Yeah, I think that answers that question.
Excellent.
Let me see. I've used a mixture of 700 and 650 at Unbound as well. So the one perhaps little factor to bear in mind is just if it was going to be a muddy edition, if you had the luxury of having a couple of pairs of wheels with you, you'll just get, for any given tire width, you'll gain some extra mud clearance with the 650s. So, and then you have used...
Gear.
Using 1x, primarily because I was told I had to the last time I did it in 2016. It wasn't even a muddy year, but there were patches of mud along the way. And at one point I was riding alongside Tim Johnson, and he was riding a Cannondale Slate, which I think was new, or kind of new at the time, with a 1x setup, but went through a patch of mud, went to change from the big ring to the small wing, got terrible chain, so it made a god-awful noise, partially damaged my front derailleur, the whole works. And this is with a pretty much brand new drivetrain. And I still remember Tim saying, "Get with it, dude." So switched to 1x, in other words. So I did, and I've been enjoying it ever since. So.
Excellent.
So I ride 700 tires, wheels. I either do a 38 or a 40. I've been riding Gravel Kings for the last couple of years, and they've worked, so I don't switch them. Get new tires for the event. You want brand new tires. So you don't want to put them on the night before, but don't have your tires that you've had 500 or 1,000 miles on, because that will help you. And I've done a 2x for the first 3 races. And then last year I rode a 1x, and I had a eagle in the back. And that's the big mistake I think people make, is they ride a 1x, but they don't have a big enough cassette in the back. And so you see a fair number of people walking these short hills. And I think at least for me, it's better to ride those hills, but as long as I have the right gearing, you can ride almost anything, but they're short and steep.
All right. Andrew?
I run a standard compact 50-34 in front and a 32 cassette in the back. I've had it on there and it just works. My first year I ran 700s, way too much pressure for sure. And after that, I got some 650B wheel set, and I've been riding 650 with a 43 Panaracer, which they don't make anymore, but couple places that still have them for sale, which I've been really happy with, because it's been a durable tire and a little faster than, maybe it feels faster than like running a 47 or something like that. And I like the Gravel Kings.
Excellent. Anybody else want to weigh in on this one?
Everybody said such good stuff, but real quick, like, just so no one out there is worried about it, I did this as like a marketing thing on a bicycle provided by a large OEM with full stock equipment. I think that a 36-32 or a 34-32, or like maybe, Ted, maybe you need a 44-50 or a 42-50 low if you're running the 1x, but you don't need to go, if you have a gravel bike or cyclocross bike, you probably don't need to go shopping to go do this race for a new bicycle. You probably don't need a drivetrain swap. And the difference between the 650B and 700C rims is diameter about that much. So you're all right. It's going to be all right. But as tires, probably the widest, for most folks listening, the widest tire you can fit safely in your frame and still knock your wheel out of true, break a spoke, clear a chunk of dirt, clear some mud, is going to be your happiest tire to run. And I'll echo the run pretty fresh ones, but I'll complicate that slightly in saying, get them mounted up, seated good, and full of sealant, and vet them that they're leak proof and nice and tightly sealed before you hit the roads out there. But you got no excuses to not be doing this on some pretty dang fresh tires, about as big as you can fit and about as low as you can get away with. I got to run tubeless. I hit rim plenty doing this thing. And that to me was a sign that I was running the right pressure.
Excellent. Is anyone using a tire insert? We had a few questions about using these, which is more common in the mountain bike world, but they're starting to get into the gravel. Is anyone using inserts in their tires? There's a like foam so that bottoming out and burping the tire is less likely.
I've bought some to try out, but haven't actually used them yet. But I have dinged rims out in Kansas, so.
All right, we'll look for a report.
If anyone is interested in using them, I think there can be a great benefit. Qualified with, I don't use them. And if you're going to use them, practice putting them on and practice taking them off, and plan on at least 2 hours and some very sore forearms. It can be a chore. Watch the YouTube videos about how to insert them because there are some great tricks. They do reduce flats. Contrasted with, if you gash your tire, there is nothing that a insert is going to do. You're going to have to change that tire, which involves taking it off, which can be a chore. So it can be 6 in one, half dozen the other. It's a tough toss up.
All right. Anything else on equipment that you've used that you really like, that you feel you can't go to Unbound without?
I would just say carry stuff and know how to use it for the bad mechanicals that you don't typically get on short rides. So, carry a chain breaker, half a paint stick to wipe mud off, and the right stuff to change flats, and a tire boot.
Just add to Jay's point about the chain breaker, just several spare links, 2 quick links. And so if you damage your chain, you can cut out a section of it and just splice in another section of chain and keep going. And then the other thing I'd mention perhaps is if your bike has a replaceable derailleur hanger, bring one of those too. Again, if it's a muddy edition, the drivetrain, all kinds of things can go wrong. And not to name drop or anything, but I think the fastest I've ever had someone go by me was in 2016. So there was a thunderstorm overnight. Ted, you'll remember this. And then early on, there was a really bad muddy section. Well, Ashton Lammy bent his derailleur hanger on that section, but replaced it on the spot, and then was chasing back up to the front, and he, like I said, just went by me so fast. And at the time he hadn't really made a name for himself, but I was kind of happy to hear that he's now the fastest person who's ever ridden 4K on the track. So I felt a little better after that.
He finished second, right?
Second or third, yeah.
So despite taking the time to replace this replaceable hanger, he still finished on the podium.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing to bring, practice using tire plugs. You can save a heck of a lot of time with plugs. I happen to use and love Dynaplug. And if you're really in the mood for time savings, they have a really cool one that connects to a CO2 so that you insert the plug, you open up the air chamber, it inflates the tire, and then you will remove it with the plug in place. It is not flawless. It is worth practicing, as crazy as that sounds. I remember being in my first event when I had a flat tire and I'm holding a plug saying, wait, what? So just, if not practice, be very, very aware of what is going to happen when you need to use it. So have somebody explain it to you. Go to a mechanic, go to a shop, ask them what to do.
One of the tips I'll say with plugs is keep your plug kit in your top tube bag where you can grab it quickly, because if you're going to use a plug, you're going to need to grab it quickly. If it's buried inside your seat bag, you're not going to be able to get it in time. So I keep mine in my top tube bag.
Does anyone have anything else to add about bags?
I was going to say, so around gearing, is that I think the first year I went out, I might have looked like I was bike packing for a week. I had frame bag, front bag, back bag. I had so many bags, and you're with other people. It's okay. You don't need as many things as you think. I had 4 spokes with me. I mean, I had way too much stuff. I would say that you'd want to make sure that the bags are definitely not going to get in your way at all, and that you can get into stuff while you're riding. So if you have food, you can get into it, and it's easy to do.
All right, we've got 5 minutes left. I'd love for each person to give something, either a story or your parting bits of advice to everyone as we face the end of winter, beginning of spring, and trying to train and get ready. Tell us what you've got to wrap this up. Jay, we'll start with you.
As a recreational rider, I think that this event ends up being 3 races or 3 rides in one. There's the first section when you're with a pack and you're going pretty fast, and it's really quite technical because the whole road is filled, you're going down things, not being able to choose your line. And that goes on until things spread out. Then there's sort of the middle part where you're feeling good, and it's really about how fast you can go at a reliable rate. And then at some point, most of us hit the endurance part, and that is like, this is farther than I want to go. It's all about just the mental part of it. And so, I think most of this event, if you've done the basic training, is about the mental piece, but just think about those different parts and be prepared for them, because you're much more likely to fall at the beginning part, and at the end, you're going to want to quit, but you've got to have the mental fortitude to keep going.
Excellent. John, how about you?
Random stories, just riding with Jay Petervari in 2013. And we kind of were on this windswept climb. And I don't know, we must have been chatting or something beforehand, because I just remember making some comment about, it's kind of gotten very quiet. But Jay says, you should hear the conversation going on in here. So.
Nice. Pamela, how about you?
Just remember, if you ask someone to support you in Unbound, they may ask you to support them on RAM.
Clearly this has happened to you.
Well, no, I ended up having to support someone on RAM who supported John on a RAM qualifier. So I had to pay back his debt. But one of the best stories related to RAM was, they said, so a good friend will help you move. A very good friend will help you move a dead body. And it takes a really special friend to crew for you. So just remember, if you do ask someone to crew for you, that it is not a day in the park for them. And please and thank you go a long, long way. I have been so lucky that everyone I have ever supported has just been so gracious, so kind. But I have been on rides where I have heard people yelling at their crew, and I imagine somebody peeing into their bottle and handing it to them if they do that. So if you have somebody out there spending their day doing that, please and thank you.
My 2017 was my second year, and that was another year that I had a whole bunch of flats early, and I booted one and I chased back, and then I changed a flat and chased back to the front group by some miracle. And I was ready to put in an attack, and I had won the previous year, and I'm just like firing on all these endorphins and saying, I'm gonna go win this race. And then I had another flat, and it was mentally demoralizing. I'm just so annoyed, and I just want to quit. And I'm so thankful that I didn't. Everyone who does this ride, whether you win the race, whether you are the last person to finish, will want to quit at some point. I don't care who you are. There are moments where you want to quit. Like I said, I'm proudly in the 1,000 Mile Club, and I've finished every event I've done. I'm very proud of that. So I don't know, just, you're going to have some really, really down, negative, dark moments. We all do. So just persevere as best as possible.
All right, Adrian.
So maybe some folks like haven't done something quite this long, or something long enough to where this will happen. I really like what Ted had to say there. And what you're going to learn about yourself is that things can get real dark, and you might be in the category of where Pamela would hide the chair from you, but know that you're not an actual medical emergency, right? There's an important distinction you made there. You got to be able to self-assess and ask yourself, okay, am I getting a 6-month overuse injury here, or is it just a hard day? Because here's what's waiting for you on the other side of that darkness is an unexpected passion blast. You get maybe some kind of high fructose corn syrup, peanut butter sandwich, Hail Mary, India, little bit of soft pedaling, and then all of a sudden you're going good and wondering, wow, like, where did this come from? Look, this is inside of me. This is the third time this has happened today, where I was in the darkness and now I'm back in the light. And so that happens out there, and it's happened to probably everyone on this panel doing events like this and doing this event. And so when it gets rough, do your self-assessment, take some deep breaths, give yourself a moment to coast, and then know, chances are, if you take good care of yourself and you're on top of your food and hydration, you're going to be coming back, even though it seems completely unfathomable. So if you can, hang on, because dang it, it's worth finishing this thing, and it does feel good to finish it. And I'm not talking about a situation where you're hurt or you're in a medical emergency. I'm talking about a DNF because you gave in to the darkness. It's worth pushing through if you can. We believe in you. That's what I got.
Andrew, how about you?
Well, I think when you go to Emporia, it's a special place, and they're special people, and it's a really nice And basically, it's like summer camp for gravel racing. You're there for 4 days. Everybody's there. All the vendors are there. It's fun. And then you get out there and I think everybody's talked about the dark place. I try to say to myself as I'm going along, like, you're doing great. You're still pedaling. You're doing great. You're still pedaling. Even as it gets dark, inside is this, that remind yourself of the things that you're doing well, not why am I out here and what am I doing? I think one thing we didn't touch on, and I just want to make sure we touch on, is try to do one of your long rides that ends in the dark if you don't think you're going to make it by the sunset. Because if you're not used to riding in the dark and you're not used to riding in the dark when you're tired, it's just a dangerous thing. And so you're doing some descents into Americus and you're doing 23 miles an hour downhill in the dark on gravel after a long day. You want to be careful. So just get familiar with that. But everybody can do this. And it's a great feeling when you finish it, for sure.
That's awesome. Thank you all so much for sharing so much expertise, wisdom, and some of the stuff you learned the hard way. We really appreciate it. And to all of you who are listening out there, we appreciate you joining us. This was a huge community of people from around the world who came today. I will include more information in a follow-up email. I didn't want to spend time today talking about who is on this call, but it's pretty cool that we have people across the globe here who are going to be coming to Emporia this June. We're going to get to see a lot of people in person there, and that will be great. So good luck to everyone training and getting ready. Have a great night. Thank you.